The Scottish-American philanthropist and industrialist Andrew Carnegie once said, "The first one gets the oyster, the second gets the shell." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the economic opportunities and geopolitical challenges that lies ahead in the exploration of the next frontier, the Arctic. My name is Dr. David Waralu.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Today we're going to be discussing what's going on in the Arctic right now, the developments and the exploration. What we see is that with global warming occurring, the ice that kept the Arctic out of reach is melting. What that means is that over $35 trillion worth of petroleum is now quickly becoming available. What does that mean? Competition, conflict, and enormous economic opportunity.
Well, that's correct, Ross. Those are major economic opportunities that lies ahead. But first, let us break it down for our viewers, for them at least to understand what does all this mean geopolitically. So the Arctic basically represents to Russia and also to the next relations among countries around the world is the next frontier as far as like what Berlin Wall was to the Cold War between the East and the West, except now we call it the ice curtain, if you will.
Yeah.
And this one basically is going to lead to major competitions among countries over not only the economic aspect, but it will be based on two major elements. One of them is sovereignty. The second one is navigation.
Well, you take a look at the countries involved, and therefore the international corporations. We certainly see Russia as a major player. Does the United States want a piece of the pie? Absolutely. We also see Finland, we see Denmark, we see Canada, who all have some claims to the Arctic. They want their piece of that massive amount of money that's available.
Yeah. Well, funny enough that even China with no territorial claim to the Arctic now is getting involved. As a matter of fact, China has invested about $900 billion in projects thus far. And they do intend to invest even more. And this is why, for China, the need for having a partner couldn't be more important, and Russia fits this role perfectly.
The Chinese are going to have to walk a very fine line in dealing with the Russians. It's not that their relationship has been stellar over the many decades. And from what we can see, China will enormously profit from having this trade route and an agreement with Russia.
Well, that's correct, Russ, because as a matter of fact, if I may, just so we can share it with our viewers, for our viewers to have a better understanding, Russia has objected to China's exploring the Arctic. That was before 2014. And what happened in 2014? It was the annexation of Crimea. And when the Western world imposed sanctions on Russia, Russia had to rethink its policy towards China and allow China to have a seat at the Arctic Council. And this is where now that cooperation is coming, because Russia's looking at it from both economic perspective, but also from a security and geopolitical.
You know, change is happening here so rapidly that President Trump made an announcement earlier this week that he's looking at ways to ease all the sanctions so he can have a better relationship with Russia on this Crimea issue.
Well, indeed, because it's because the administration basically they are seeing how far Russia is going regarding this claim, the territory over the Arctic, but also because, as you mentioned earlier, the $35 trillion that lies under that ice, and the ice is melting faster. So we can ignore something of that massive wealth, if you will, in natural resources, that country is going to have to compete. As a matter of fact, Russia already put a titanium flag at the ocean floor of the Arctic.
Claiming it as their
Claiming
very
it
own.
as their own. That's correct.
You know, this is so important to China because as they're transporting their manufactured goods from east to west, if they can go through the Bering Sea, they can save as much as 2 weeks transit time. One of the things that means is that they're already cheap products, and of course the world is addicted to the cheap Chinese products, can get even cheaper because of the lowered amount of travel and the massive amount of cost that goes with that. And when you cut 2 weeks off the travel time, the cost, retail cost goes down, and it means Western manufacturers are going to have an even harder time competing than they do today.
Well, that's one of the key factors usually, even when we advise our client, for example, that's the one who wants to be involved in international commerce and so forth. One of the things is we always advise them on finding the best route, if you will, because it saves so much money cost-wise.
Oh, yeah.
For China in this context is because China is looking at it from two aspects. One of them is cost, of course, but a second, it has to do with security. So to China, when ice is melting or is melt completely, the maritime routes will open up. And this will allow China to avoid key choke points. There are about 7 of them around the world, only major 3 where China's cargo ships goes through. One of them is Malacca Strait in the Southeast Asia. The second one is in Suez Canal near the Red Sea. And the third one is Bab el-Mandeb in the Horn of Africa, south of Yemen. So you can just see why China is thinking in terms of this is good for us, because all this ties to one particular aspect, and that's the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative that President Xi launched in 2013. This is to China, this is the big picture, and we're talking about cost savings here, but also dominance of the sea routes.
Oh, absolutely right. You know, when we take a look at the corporations that are involved with this, they have to be interested in the massive amount of natural resources. Let me get these numbers right. It's estimated that there are 90 billion barrels of oil, that there are over 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and there are 44 billion barrels of liquefied natural gas. Mm-hmm. That's a massive amount of resources that some companies and countries are going to get to benefit from.
Well, those are very astonishing numbers, and because also Russia sees the opportunity in all this. And this is where I see the dominance of Russia of the Arctic. It will be almost similar way that Iran is exerting the influence on the Strait of Hormuz. Well, as you and I know, and I'm sure our viewers have an understanding about this, that 1/4 of the global oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a narrow strait. It's not that big. So Russia is looking at it from that perspective. And this is where I anticipate and I expect not only the major competition over the resources, but also the confrontations. Because it's exactly what Berlin Wall was to the East and West.
Right.
That fierce competition over ideology, commerce, economic, and so forth. Now it's going to be replicated in the Arctic. The only difference this time around us is that China will be added to the mix.
You know, another important consideration here is, what do American companies need to know this for?
Well, it's important because, for example, oil companies in the U.S., they need to understand that the $35 trillion, it's not a small amount.
Right.
You still have to find one way of being involved or getting involved because that's what business is all about. And this is one thing we advise our clients to, because we provide that risk assessment. Is it worth it to get involved or not?
I was on an extended consulting project with a major airline here in Dallas. And one of the things that occurred during that time was they got a real sweetheart deal in aviation fuel. they were actually paying $3 a gallon less
Wow.
than the competition. They were so thrilled about that. Of course, they got more business because their prices were lower. 3 years that contract was up, and they went and purchased at the current market value at that time, which was considerably higher. Within a couple of weeks, the price dropped to the previous one, but they were already stuck in a high-price contract. If they had had the right reconnaissance, if they had the right information, they could have saved themselves hundreds of millions of dollars in jet fuel fees.
So whoever was advising the company, Ross, did not provide them with the strategic vision as to where the oil price is going to be. Because usually you will be able to find that kind of information if you know the trends where it's going. And that's one of the things we do keep an eye on as far as the risk assessments in providing to the clients.
And as you say, David, in your forthcoming book, The Dynamics of Russia's Geopolitics, Remaking the Global Order. And I quote, "Even China, a nation with no territorial claim to the Arctic, has begun funding Arctic development projects. It underscores the region's growing global importance and influence. And with the climate change impacting the area and the world over, we should expect fierce competition in the near future." End of quote.
Well, that's correct, Ross. I couldn't agree with you more, even though I wrote that one. But on a serious note, is the idea of what I meant by that is that how China is going to now refine its role within the Arctic on both fronts. On the economic front, by assisting in the exploration of the $35 trillion, but also geopolitically, by ensuring that the sphere of influence stays within the countries in that area, and mainly Russia and China. Because the objective of China's involvement there, not only again for economic, but also to keep the Americans away. So,
David, I know that you recently did a project, a major research project, for a government agency. Would you tell us about it?
well, that's correct, Ross. That was when I was invited to address the high-ranking officers from the Pentagon, and among the attendees were also some generals from NATO. They attended the event, which was in Texas at Fort Hood, where I was stationed before. And the key topic that they wanted me to talk about was the Middle East and the Arctic. And the key questions regarding that aspect was, what do we expect in the near future as far as the Arctic? And my answer was, expect a fair competition. And this is why what's taking place right now in the Arctic, it's not surprising me at all, because I did see the trend where things are going based on the research I conducted and the analysis I did and read and all that. So it gives me an idea where that's going to be. Interesting enough for us is that at the end of that presentation, I was surrounded by about 20 officers, and they all asked one question, and one question only. What should we expect in the Arctic? And my answer was, expect a fierce competition. And this is why the United States government went ahead and adopted some of my findings in the research into its policy now regarding the Arctic. So I am not surprised at all at the fierce competitions taking place right now in the Arctic.
Final thought. With the military and economic development going on in the Arctic, it's important to your country, it's important to your company to follow what's going on in this very rapidly changing environment.
Well, to our viewers, I hope that you find this show very informative. And we provided you basic information basically about the economic opportunities, but also the geopolitical challenges that lies ahead when it comes down to the Arctic. And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.